come this way. Everybody right here, the first stage. Right this. You face me. Face this one, right here. Face it. I'm around here, Rachel. Two classes coming in.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
They can go right behind Ms. Pritchett.
You in the front, you look.
Yeah. You guys, Mr. Habadine, come file right behind Ms. Pritchett's group. Come right behind Ms. Pritchett's group.
Maurice, move down.
Okay, this is scene one, guys, okay? Eyes and ears. Okay. Come on, Trouble. Parallel parking.
Emmett Till. 14-year-old Emmett Till was visiting relatives in Money, Mississippi on August 24, 1955, when he was accused of whistling at Carolyn Bryant, a white woman who was a cashier at a grocery store. 4 days later, Bryant's husband Roy and his half-brother J.W. Milliam kidnapped Till, beat him, tortured him, and shot him in the head. The men were tried for murder, but an all-white male jury acquitted them. Emmett Till's mother insisted on having an open casket at his funeral. She wanted the world to see what they did to her son. Till's murder in an open casket funeral galvanized the emerging civil rights movement.
The body was shipped home, back north to Chicago, where Mamie Till Bradley insisted on an open casket funeral. So all the world can see, she said, what they did to my boy. Jet magazine showed Till's corpse, beaten, mutilated, shot through the head. An entire generation of young black people would remember the horror of that photo.
Okay, guys, just scooch down to scene two.
The body was shipped home.
Rosa Parks. It was on December 1st, 1955 that Rosa made her famous stand while sitting on the bus. Rosa had settled in her seat on the bus after a hard day's work. All the seats on the bus had filled up when a white man boarded. The bus driver told Rosa and some other African Americans to stand up. Rosa refused. The bus driver said he would call the police. Rosa didn't move. Soon the police showed up and Rosa was arrested. That night, a number of African American leaders got together and decided to boycott the city buses. This meant that Africans would no longer ride the buses. One of these leaders was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The boycott continued for 381 days. Finally, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the segregation laws in Alabama were unconstitutional.
For a number of years, Negro passengers on the city bus lines of Montgomery have been humiliated, intimidated, and faced threats on this bus line. Just the other day, one of the fine citizens of our community, Mrs. Rosa Parks, was arrested because she refused to give up her seat for a white passenger. Mrs. Rosa Parks was arrested, taken down to jail, taken from the bus, just because she refused to give up her seat. At present, we are in the midst of a protest of Negro citizens of Montgomery, representing some 44% of the population. 90% at least of the regular Negro bus passengers are staying off the buses, and we plan to continue until something is done.
Because of Rosa Parks, we can face our fears and boldly walk in the direction of our dreams. Because of them, we can.
So you guys are just going to come along and see the three here, okay?
Lunch counter sit-in. On February 1st, 1960, 4 black teens sat down at a whites-only Wallworks lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. Franklin McCain, Joseph McNeil, Ezekiel Blair Jr., and David Richmond wanted much more than the coffee and the donuts the waitress refused to serve them. Their goal was to stop the unfair treatment of blacks at the lunch counter and many other places in the United States. The Greensboro Four, along with friends and supporters, continued to return to the lunch counter every day. After 6 months, the students were finally served.
Young people, especially students in predominantly black colleges, were inspired to move against the injustices they saw. In the winter of 1960, they began a series of sit-ins at segregated lunch counters in a dozen American cities that refused to serve African Americans.
We never gone down this road before, so there was some concern about what could happen, or what would happen.
A manager would come out and say, we're just not going to serve you, and you're best getting out because we're going to call the police. And there was always the uncertainty of what would happen.
And you just stay there and you keep your eyes on the prize. You feel the pain, but you don't become bitter. You don't become hostile. And you sort of lose yourself. You forget about your own circumstances. And you become involved in the circumstances of others. But we were committed to the philosophy and to the discipline of nonviolence.
You guys just scooch over.
Ruby Bridges. As a 6-year-old first grader in New Orleans in 1960, Ruby Bridges became the first black student to attend an all-white elementary school in the South. She showed unforgettable loving, forgiveness, and courage when faced with the ugly, screaming white mobs who jeered and taunted her every day as she walked into William Grant Elementary School. Federal marshals had to escort Ruby to school, but she never quit or turned back. Ruby astonished her teacher one day when she asked Ruby why she had paused and talked to the crowd of white adults that morning. And Ruby responded, "I wasn't talking, I was praying for them."
On November 14, 1960, 6-year-old Ruby Bridges entered the first grade and made history. Bridges was the first African American to attend William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans. Ruby and her mother were escorted by 4 federal marshals because the local and other federal officials were now willing to protect them. As she and her mother walked toward the school, crowds of onlookers shouted vicious and derogatory threats. 6 years later, the Supreme Court had ruled to desegregate schools in the landmark Brown versus the Board of Education case. Many parents withdrew their children because of integration, and Barbara Henry, a Boston native, was the only teacher willing to accept her. After some time, integration was accepted by the community, and more students, both black and white, enrolled in the school.
Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream. On August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. That event is now remembered as the most important symbols of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. It was held to protest racial discrimination and to demand civil rights in laws Congress.
We face the difficulties of today and tomorrow. I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. Somehow we think
Four little girls. Even as the inspiring words of Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous I Have a Dream speech rang out from the Lincoln Memorial during the historic March on Washington in August of 1963, racial relations in the segregated South were marked by continued violence and inequality. On September 15th, a bomb exploded before Sunday morning services at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, a church with a predominantly black congregation that served as a meeting place for civil rights leaders. 4 young girls were killed and many other people injured. Outrage over the incident and the violent clash between protesters and police that followed helped draw national attention to the hard-fought, often dangerous struggle for civil rights for African Americans.
It was Sunday morning. It was church. It was children.
It was 10:22 in the morning at the Birmingham 16th Street Baptist Church. A group of young girls had just finished their Sunday school lesson. They were changing into their choir robes.
The bodies and the partial clothing that you saw, it was like a nightmare.
They were not participants. They were not leaders. They were not marchers or sit-ins. They didn't go on a freedom ride. They were just there to attend Sunday school.
The bomb that had killed the 4 children had been the work of the Ku Klux Klan. Until that moment, the majority of white people had never fully comprehended the magnitude of the intolerance and hate Black Americans faced in their struggle.
Malcolm X assassination. On the evening of February 21st, 1965, at the Audubon Ballroom in Manhattan, where Malcolm X was about to deliver a speech, 3 gunmen rushed the stage and shot him 15 times at point-blank range. Malcolm X was pronounced dead on arrival at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital shortly thereafter. He was only 39 years old.
We declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Selma March. In early 1965, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Southern Christian Leadership Conference made Selma, Alabama the focus of its efforts to register Black voters in the South. That March, protesters attempted to march for Selma to the state capital of Montgomery were met with violent resistance by state and local authorities. As the world watched, the protesters finally achieved their goal, walking around the clock for 3 days to reach Montgomery. The historic march greatly helped raise awareness of the difficulty faced by Black voters in the South and the need for a Voting Rights Act passed later that year.
It is a Sunday to be remembered, not only by Selma, but by the rest of Alabama and by the rest of America. Under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King and under the presidentially ordered protection of the National Guard and soldiers of the United States Army, the long-awaited, long-delayed Freedom March to Montgomery begins. UN Undersecretary Dr. Ralph Bunche is but one of many persons in public life who joined the march. The bridge where before the marchers had been turned back is crossed without incident. By one means or another, practically every foot of the 54-mile course is under surveillance to prevent violence. Some 3,200 people walked the first few miles from Selma. After the first day, when the highway narrows from 4 to 2 lanes, the number is reduced to 300. First night's stop is at a farm where tents have been pitched in a cornfield. The logistics of feeding and preserving the health of the participants has been as carefully worked out as an army maneuver. The 5-day trek will end at the Executive Mansion, where one of the most impressively delivered petitions in history, a petition for rights for Negroes, will have been brought to the governor.
Black Panthers. In 1966, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale formed the Black Panther Party. The party established patrols in Black communities to monitor police activities and protect the residents from police brutality. The Black Panther Party had 4 desires: equality in education, housing, employment, and civil rights. The Black Panther Party instituted a variety of community social programs, most extensively the free breakfast for children programs and community health clinics.
Studies came out saying that children that didn't have a good breakfast in the morning were less attentive at school and less inclined to do well and suffered from fatigue. I mean, there was all sorts of scientific reasons to have a good breakfast in the morning. And we just simply took that information and a program was developed serving breakfast to children.
After my father came home from Vietnam and was discharged from the Army and couldn't get work, we were going through a very hard time. Food was kind of, just the everyday necessities were hard. I was embarrassed to go, but when you went, kids are all laughing, and then all of a sudden the stigma, or whatever you thought was a stigma, went away, and we really got to see that, yes, this is what the Black Panthers are.
I'm going to scoot you around to the last two seats.
Assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. Just after 6 p.m., King was standing on the second floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel, where he and associates were staying, when a sniper's bullet struck him in the neck. He was rushed to a hospital where he was pronounced dead about an hour later, at the age of 39. Black Lives Matter. In 2013, the Black Lives Matter movement began with the use of the hashtag Black Lives Matter on social media. After the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting death of African-American teen Trayvon Martin, Black Lives Matter became nationally recognized for its street demonstrations following the 2014 deaths of 2 African-Americans, Michael Brown, resulting in protests and unrest in Ferguson, and Eric Garner in New York City. Black Lives Matter regularly holds protests against police killings of Black people and broader issues of racial profiling, police brutality, and perceived racial inequality in the United States criminal justice system. Black Lives Matter demonstrated against the deaths of numerous African Americans by police actions, including those of Charlie Mundu Kunye, Tony Robinson, Anthony Hill, Megan Hockaday, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Charleston Nye, Jonathan Sanders, Sandra Bland, Samuel Dubose, Jeremy McDowell, Corey Jones, and Jamar Clark, among others.
Ms. Pritchett, Ms. Shahabadine, we'd like to invite your classes to march with us around the first floor.